Sitting here right now with the author of Teens, yes, Brother Nathan Thompson, a Chicago legend. What made you write this book? Why is it important that these stories be told?
This started many years ago. Some of the cats that I grew up with, we were real into these gangster movies, And we went into them so much, it occurred to me one time that I knew more about the history of the Italians than I did about black people. So, I wanted to know, what were the brothers doing back in the Al Capone days? So that's really how it got started with me. A conversation with a buddy of mine, a 40 ounce in a joint. That's really how it got started. That's a true story. So not long after that, I walked into Woodson Library and I didn't leave for 14 years. And during that time is when I looked up the history of Black Chicago and learned all about the numbers and policy and our role in it and what all that was doing for us as a people. And so we moved from there to, I actually wanted to do a screenplay first, but then it just kind of occurred to me that I would come off a lot better if I actually did a book on this. And at that time, I had never written a book in my life, but I was so moved by the story, I figured it out, and I made the book happen. And the motivating factor for me, staying involved with it and doing it, I got to a place where I really wanted black men to see another side of themselves other than the side that has been presented by Hollywood my whole life. That was the driving factor. Brothers need to see other things we were doing as opposed to the things that other people created for us to do.
What are some things that you were shocked to find out?
One of the things that shocked me the most was just how much money certain black people had back during the time that history defines as the Great Depression. You're talking about some brothers in Chicago that were millionaires and 100,000-aires during the Depression. And that led to the discovery that we were just about the only guys in town making any real money during those years. And that's one of the things that made it so lucrative for white gangsters to come after. During its heyday, I think the guys were just too busy hustling to really, they probably didn't figure it out themselves that, hey man, this is big what we're doing. I don't know if they ever concluded that themselves because they were in the moment and they were doing what they needed to do. But when you look back at it as a brief in the timeline of our history, it is a phenomenon when you look at where black people came up from. See, history in this country is defined in terms of very specific eras. We tend to talk a lot about the so-called civil rights era, Martin Luther King and all this business. There was a lot more civil rights going on among black people in the days prior to the so-called civil rights era. When you go back to the 1920s and 30s and 40s, as a people we had far more unity than we do today. We're grasping for unity today. We're scraping the jar today for unity. For one thing, when you're talking about the 1920s and the 1930s, you're in a time period that is a lot closer to the days of emancipation and Reconstruction as compared to now. We're decades and generations away from that. As a people, we don't feel about that how we felt about it in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, we were closer to it. Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents were literally 1 foot out of that life. A couple of people that are mentioned in my book as it relates to the opening of the Jones Brothers store on 47th Street. This was the biggest thing that happened to the black community in those days. 1937. There's an elderly couple that's there in the crowd for this grand opening. This elderly couple had both been born in slavery. They come out of slavery, and now all of these great things are happening with black people in Chicago. They saved their pennies for years, or for months in this case, so they could come to this opening and buy some things to send to their grandchildren still in the South. I mean, that is a really, really big deal. This couple, I think, was like in their 80s or something like that. Robert Abbott wrote about them in an editorial on the day of, about the event, about the opening. and he dedicated an editorial to this couple, and it just blew me away. It just really blew me away. So when I talk about being closer to the feeling of all of that, this is an elderly couple in 1937 who was born in slavery. They have a lot more feeling and a lot more depth to their feeling about what all of this store opening means. Yeah. So you fast forward into modern day, these are things that we take for granted.
Absolutely, yes.
So for us to find the unity that we're looking for today, we have to first find some understanding and come to terms with the understanding of yesterday. We have to reorient our minds in that direction, because the first black whatever is not as important today as it was 50 years ago or 75 years ago. And it's a tragedy that we have lost that as a people. That's one of the things that kept us grounded and moving forward in a progressive way.
Can you talk a little bit about the politics when you talk about the mayor of Bronzville and how important that was in terms of the politics that we had and how that then reflected, too, with the policy?
Well, the mayor of Bronzville piece, that begins with Jimmy Gentry. He's the man that is credited with coining the name Bronzville. He was a entertainment promoter, among other things. He worked at first the Chicago Bee newspaper and then later the Chicago Defender newspaper. So it's James Gentry who once upon a time used to run these promotions for the Miss Bronze beauty pageants. So this is where the whole Bronzeville piece gets born out of, and it leads to the mayor of Bronzeville piece. So Gentry first tried this with the Bee newspaper. For whatever reason, it didn't work there. So by 1933-34, he had moved over to the Chicago Defender and brought the plan there with him, and it was able to be successful there. And it was successful there because of a couple of things. Number one, Robert Abbott, the founder and publisher of the Chicago Defender newspaper, was a race man. And in those days, that label, race man, that means you're a man about the business of the race, promoting the race, progress for black people.
Okay.
He was a race man. He was the one that put the call out for black people to come up from the South and come on up north, what we know today as the Great Black Migration. Robert Abbott himself calls it the Great Northern Drive, and it was about getting up out of the oppressive South, coming up north for jobs. And steel mill was part of that. This was done in waves. He puts out the call, we come up, there's a lot of progress going on. The mayor of Bronzeville piece worked at this time because it became part of that because of Robert Abbott and because of the Policy King's work that was going on with the Chicago Defender newspaper in the neighborhood. Here is Robert Abbott, who owns the premier black newspaper in the country, who's joined at the hip with Ed Jones, the biggest policy king in the country, who controls an army of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 men and women. That's what made it work. Now you can fast forward from that thought process to the time of Harold Washington's first election. A lot of things got Harold Washington elected. One of the things that got Harold Washington elected that doesn't get discussed a lot is the street piece. Drug dealers gave their customers discounts when they came to cop if they showed the stub where they had been to vote. This was done on layers. You know that phrase, all hands on deck? We were all in the mix. Wasn't no Negroes sitting off in the corner not giving a fuck about nothing. No, everybody was in this. The unity of black people at that time in Chicago is what made Harold Washington happen as mayor. So again, going back to the days of policy, going back to the days of the mayor of Bronzeville, that was a big deal for us. Some people believe that he was murdered. Some people believe that his health issues led to his heart attack. And there is reasonable argument on both sides of the equation. August 4th, 1952, that was the day they murdered Ted Rowe. People say Bronzeville died that night too, yeah. The thing that you take away from that when you walk through the entire story timeline, you look at the pivotal moments in politics and who was in control of them. And when you look at the gang warfares that were going on, you look at how we survived that. So when you talk about what do we take from all of that, that we can move forward with. Standing on your square and what you believe in is certainly one of the things that you take away from that.
Absolutely.
When you look at the history of numbers and policy in the country as a whole, you find markets like Pittsburgh and other cities that folded. They gave in to mob pressure very early on. Brothers in Chicago stayed the course for more than 30 years. So the thing is, the unity that we had in those days was a galvanizing unity. This is why it's important to understand that when you are in the 1920s and you're in the 1930s, you are closer in time to the time of emancipation and Reconstruction. Reconstruction, or should I say the architects of the Reconstruction era, gave up on us and threw in the towel. In that moment, we were left to fend for ourselves. In that moment, we realized this nation, or the people that run it, are not going to do anything for us. So we figured out something to do, and it worked for us. So as I always say, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. When we talk about trying to create black unity today, that is not a new phenomenon. We need to learn from our past, not just close the door on our past and keep moving. There are great things that we did that we need to learn from and reevaluate why we left the Republican Party and joined the Democratic Party. Do we need to stay in the Democratic Party, flip back to the Republican Party, or create our own political entity? That is something that we did not do. We did not stop to reevaluate. We became complacent and kept, or at least we thought we kept moving forward. Funny thing is, every step we took, we were still getting killed, shot, bombed, and marginalized. So what's really happening? So it's important for us to learn from our history so that our futures are controlled by us, our present and our future. And we can only do that. You can only convince someone that they are capable of doing something if you show them and prove to them you've actually already done this before. You just stopped believing in yourself. That's your problem. Start to believe in yourself again. Then you will find your capability. Then you will find your action. Look at how the politics were operated then compared to now. What steps we took then as opposed to now that caused us to control our politics. When we were in control of our politics, we were in control of our neighborhood, we were in control of our present and our future. Driven by our elders who had been where we hadn't. And we were respectful enough to listen to our elders and learn from our elders. We lost all of that some time ago, and now we're just all over the map.
And many of this can be found in the book's Kings,
Absolutely,
correct?
Absolutely. I give you a timeline history. It runs from 1885 into present day, and it walks you through all of the political changeovers, all of the racketeer changeovers, what happened when policy was taken over, who took it over, what they did with it, how they lost it, and how the state ultimately took it and created the state lottery. Because that wasn't just Illinois, that's going on all over this country. The success of state lotteries across this country are built on and patterned after the success of the black policy and numbers operators. That's a fact. And it's still our money that's being spent on the lottery predominantly. So we need to figure out what we need to be doing with our money.